Now let's examine the anomalies around the last plane, United Airlines Flight 93, that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, reportedly at 10:03 a.m. and 20 minutes away from Washington. The official story made me proud to be an American. The passengers overcame the hijackers and sacrificed their lives so that others might be spared. Back to Charles Lewis again at LAX that morning. They said fighter jets had been scrambled from 2 different military bases and that they had shot down the plane over Pennsylvania. And that was way before we got the hero story. The first news reports expressed surprise at how little debris was visible at the crash site. The Pennsylvania State website even said it was hard to believe that a 757 plunged into the ground with such force that it literally disintegrated and created a still smoldering crater in the ground. Then 5 days later, CNN News reported, apparently another debris site that had been cordoned off 6 to 8 miles away. This, the commentator said, raises a number of questions. Why? Could it have blown that far away? The FBI immediately took over the investigation, and for a long time wouldn't honor family members' requests, asking if they could listen to the cockpit voice recorder. This was finally allowed on April 18, 2002, provided they'd agree not to reveal anything about what they heard. And for some reason, the last 3 minutes weren't on there. Barry Lichty, the mayor of the nearby town of Indian Lake, says he heard what sounded like a missile fire that morning. The military did admit some years later that it was tracking Flight 93, and a Colonel Robert Marr recalled hearing that we will take lives in the air to preserve lives on the ground. He then ordered the air controllers to have fighter jets intercept the plane, but supposedly the commercial flight crashed before that could happen. Of course, we never fired upon the plane, said Dick Cheney. We just witnessed an act of heroism. The official story is that for the first time in history, the black boxes were not recovered, not from any of the 4 planes. For the TV pilot I did about 9/11 on True TV, we spoke to a guy who knew about the existence of 3 black boxes. He physically saw one, and his partner saw 2 more. He says they were taken away in a black government van. Another thing I find interesting, also for the first time in history, no attempt was made to reconstruct the planes with whatever parts they could find. They even did this with TWA Flight 800 that went down in 1996 in the Atlantic, and for that they had to dive down 1,200 feet. After Pearl Harbor, General Martin Short and some admirals were fired because of their alleged negligence. After 9/11, not a single employee at the FAA or NORAD got punished. In fact, all the major military men involved received promotions. They included General Richard Myers, who was named chairman of the Joint Chiefs on October 1st. The way I see it, with all the advance warnings about a terrorist attack, a fair number of Bush's team should have gotten the axe. Except right up to the president himself, it was all about denial. Here was Bush in 2004. Had I any inkling whatsoever that the people were going to fly airplanes into buildings, we would have moved heaven and earth to save the country. Here was Rumsfeld testifying before the 9/11 Commission. I knew of no intelligence during the 6+ months leading up to September 11th to indicate terrorists would hijack commercial airlines, use them as missiles to fly into the Pentagon or the World Trade Center towers. And here was Condoleezza Rice. This kind of analysis about the use of airplanes as weapons actually was never briefed to us. Oh, really? What about the intelligence briefing Bush received on August 6, 2001, that was headed, Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S., and even mentioned possible hijackings? Or Condi Rice being warned about al-Qaeda's plotting by then CIA Director George Tenet on July 10, 2001, but brushing him off. The 9/11 Commission was aware of this, but decided to leave it out of their report. The CIA's counterintelligence chief, J. Cofer Black, later, felt there were things the Commission wanted to know about and things they didn't want to know about. Rice responded, "What I am quite certain of is that I would remember if I was told, as this account apparently says, that there was about to be an attack in the United States, and the idea that I would somehow have ignored that I find incomprehensible." Seems she stammered over her words a little. These were far from the only warnings. Israel sent 2 senior agents of the Mossad to Washington in August 2001 to alert the CIA and FBI to the existence of a cell of as many as 200 terrorists said to be preparing a big operation. 8 months before the attacks, French intelligence warned the U.S. in 9 different reports about airplane hijacking plans by radical Islamists connected to bin Laden and the Taliban. FBI agents working out of the Minneapolis and Phoenix offices tried to alert their superiors. Dr. Park Godfrey, an associate professor of computer science at Toronto's York University, said under oath in a New York courtroom that a longtime associate of his, Susan Lindauer, warned him several times, and as late as August 2001, that we expected a major attack on the southern part of Manhattan, and that the attack would encompass the World Trade Center, an attack that would involve airplanes and possibly a nuclear weapon. Lindauer, who says she was a CIA asset, claimed to have made an attempt to inform John Ashcroft at the Justice Department, who referred her to the Office of Counterterrorism. Which brings us to the whole question of the 19 alleged hijackers. Did you ever wonder how our government came up with their identities so fast? Even before the last plane crashed, the FBI was telling counterterrorism official Richard Clark they had a list of the names. It took 2 years to get indictments on the Lockerbie bombing, but not this time. Except on September 16th, one of the supposed hijackers walked into the consulate in Saudi Arabia. He was actually a pilot for Saudi Airlines. On September 22nd, one of the Flight 11 hijackers announced he was alive and well. 2 more Saudi pilots did the same thing the next day. On September 27th, CBS found hijacker Hamzi, Flight 77, working for an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. No matter, all these guys are still on the list today as being among the perpetrators. What evidence do we have then? 2 days after the attacks, our government said it was clear-cut that Osama bin Laden was the man behind it all, and that the Taliban in Afghanistan would soon be handing over its proof. 10 more days went by, at which time Colin Powell said he'd soon show us the documentation. Meantime, in 3 separate statements, bin Laden denied any involvement. On December 13th, the State Department released a video purporting to show him describing the attacks, but before long a lot of people were questioning whether it was authentic. On the day after Christmas, a Taliban official said he'd attended Osama's funeral, but on the 27th of December came a bin Laden video praising al-Qaeda's successful hit on us. Another couple of years went by before a 3rd tape surfaced, October 29, 2004, a few days before the presidential election. Think heightened terror alert, with a blatant taking of full responsibility. However, as of June 6, 2006, the FBI said it had no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11. He's been charged with several crimes related to terrorist attacks, but not with 9/11. I find that very odd. Not one shred of evidence produced in a courtroom that leads to the conclusion bin Laden spearheaded these attacks. The justice system that works for anything else is suddenly suspended over terrorism. We are led to believe that a hijacker's passport flew out of his pocket when his plane hit the tower, made it safely through 9,000 gallons of jet fuel, and landed to be found on a sidewalk 1,000 feet below. Another hijacker's ID supposedly turned up in the Pentagon wreckage. one of the few pieces that survived.